So with that, I'm going to invite ERI Executive Director, Brother Brian Bond, okay, to kindly welcome everyone and to introduce Brother Kevin Cawley. So over to you, Brian. Okay, you're not a co-host, sorry. 1 minute, let me just make you a co-host. Right, Brian, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks, Tino. So welcome everyone to this webinar on Hope Amid Our Planetary Crisis. It's good to see so many of you from so many different parts of the world. And as mentioned, the webinar is going to be led by Brother Kevin Cawley and Sister Kathleen Deignan. Kevin is a member of our ERI team, and he's based in New York, where he monitors events at the headquarters of the United Nations. He has for a long time had a particular interest and involvement with the issue of climate change. Both Kevin and Kathleen are also on the staff of Iona University, which is the Christian Brothers University in New York. So I think with that introduction, without further ado, I'll hand over to Kevin, and perhaps you might like to say a little bit more about Sister Kathleen when you start your presentation. Thanks, Kevin. Over to you.
Good morning from New York, and thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tino. Thank you, Terry, for being the hosts today. Sister Kathleen and I have been working together for much too long to talk about at Iona University. And right now, we're both very heavily engaged in the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue, which is part of the Deignan Institute for Earth and Spirit. Kathleen has a long time affection and interest in Thomas Berry. She is one of his students from when he was teaching at Fordham University. And that's how I came to know Thomas, by way of Kathleen. Thomas has enormous wisdom to share with us, and we will get a little glimpse of that today. Kathleen's going to take us into the conversation at the beginning here, laying out the context. And at that point, when she's ready to hand it over, she'll hand it to me, and I will start to pick up on the questions of what is our predicament and how we might go forward with, particularly today, an emphasis on some of the signs of hope that we are seeing. Kathleen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Brother Kevin. Thank you to all of the Christian brothers of Edmund Rice. It's really an honor for me to be here with all of you and in this very wide and expansive circle today as we do the great work of generating hope in a time of tremendous crisis. I am going to try to share my slides. I'm attempting to share my screen at the moment. So if you would just be patient with me, because when I try to share my screen, I get the grid for layouts. Okay. Does anybody?
Yes.
Let me, I'm sorry, I have it now.
Lovely. Okay.
Can you see this, brothers and friends?
Yes, yes, Kathleen. It's
Good.
perfect.
Wonderful. So again, I thank you very much, and it is my real honor and how shall I say, passion to introduce us to Thomas Berry. I'm sure many of you know him, probably most of you know him, but I will endeavor to say some things and have him aid us in the cultivation of hope for our time. I speak of Thomas as the sage of the Ecozoic, and I'll be sharing what this notion of ecozoic is. It's a term that he coined to describe the age that we are constructing, that we are generating, that we are midwifing and bringing to birth in our time, because this is the great work of our time. In the midst of crisis, we are the bearers of hope. And so I'd like to say that Thomas, though he passed in 2009, we are experiencing in our time his ever deepening wisdom. His word, his teaching is bearing greater and greater resonance and meaning as our time unfolds in this planetary era and as the crises mount up. So we are hoping to witness, at least among ourselves, the generation of a mode of spirituality that is going to inform and foster and fuel the great work that we are about. And so that's what we engage in today. The call of the ecozoic, in the language of Teilhard de Chardin and of the earliest teachers of Christianity, we understand that we live in an unfolding universe. And Thomas was very gifted in elaborating the story of the universe. It is a story in which divinity is constantly generating a body, an almost infinite body for itself. And this generation of a new body is really what gives us the greatest ground for the work that we are about to do. As I said, the ecozoic is the time that is coming, that we are fostering, because the living one is always up ahead. Divinity is a mystery of futuring, if nothing else. Creator is a mystery of ever generative fruitfulness, unfolding a universe that is utterly incomprehensible to us, though little by little we are beginning, as we pay attention, to discern what the universe itself is about. And so I'd like to begin with this invocation from Thomas Berry against the background of these glorious icons of endangered species by Angela Mano. So today we gather in the name of the natural world as revelatory, and of the earth as primary community of our loyalty, and to the progress of the whole planetary commune in its integrity. These are our three commitments. Already, this is a statement of hope. So we are the living seeds of a new planetary age. This, again, is a statement and a claim of standing in the energy of hope. Let's remember that, at least in the Catholic Christian tradition, we understand that there are three dynamics of divinity, which constitute the divine nature itself, and those are faithing and hoping and loving. And so we are the living seeds of this new planetary time, activating the curious and the undeniable emergence of an irrepressible global spirituality manifesting in our time. And the extraordinary numbers in this webinar hosted by Edmund Rice International is testament to that. We are the hope that we are yearning for. I think probably you all know that Thomas was born in the early part of the 20th century. He was an extraordinary young man who had a mystical experience in a field of lilies as a young boy of 10 years old. And that experience, you could say a theophany or a diaphany, an experience of divinity shining through the natural world, guided him through his whole life. And he has left us an enormous trove of wisdom for our time, particularly in the book, The Great Work, which I'll be referring to. And the universe story, grounding our sense of identity in the largest framework possible. We are not simply humankind. We are certainly not simply persons from our own regions and our own cultures or nations. We are not simply people from any particular religious confession. We are essentially earthlings. We are essentially cosmic presences, aiding the unfolding of divinity in the universe. And that's what Thomas speaks of in the universe story. In his book, The Dream of the Earth, he gives even more particular and inspiring orientation to the great work and to the spirit life that means to support it and sustain it. And in Evening Thoughts, he gives his final, one could say, his testament to us. Thomas says that this moment of supreme crisis, which is inarguable, obviously, and has been demonstrated very, very clearly in these last decades, to address this global crisis, this is the great work of our time. It is the great work of a people. And for it, we will need the deepest kind of spiritual transformation, that is to say, psychological transformation, transformation of worldview, transformation of self and species understanding that is possible, or we will not have the energy to sustain this unprecedented work before us. And I want to say that I think that what Thomas offers us is not simply an integral perspective on the nature of our crisis, which he does, that is to say, where are we? He not only gives us an understanding of how we got here, which he does, an historical understanding of this technological, industrial, colonialist, capitalist construct that has brought us to this crisis. But also he brings us an understanding of the psychological, emotional, spiritual worldview that needs to be generated. I love this particular statement and testament of Thomas's that perhaps we can say among ourselves today, that we come here to relieve an ancient wrong. We wish especially to restore this earth to its ancient joy. For while much of what we have done is beyond healing, there is a resilience throughout the land, throughout the earth, that only awaits its opportunity to flourish once again with something of its ancient splendor. This is such a prayer of hope for me, and I hope that it sounds like that in you. We had the enormous joy to have Thomas come and be with us at Iona University, where we established in his name the Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue, which Brother Kevin Cawley directs at Iona. And during that time, during all of Thomas's time with us, and even in his aftermath, he is sharing with us the depth and the sacred nature of the news story actually that science is telling us, our new revelatory story. It's the story, he says, that the universe is telling itself. And we, of course, each of us is a word. We are a little phoneme within that great story. It's the story being told by every being in the universe, by the stars of the heavens, by the rivers of earth, by every wind that blows, by every snowflake that falls, by every leaf in the forest. And to know the story of the universe as our sacred, corporate, universal, unitive story is to have an adequate foundation for the task before us. Because if we do not know the story of the universe, we cannot know the story of Earth within that universe from its scientific telling. And if we do not comprehend what is happening on this planet, we will not be able to address it. And so the story tells us who we are, how we came to be here, and what our lives are all about. That's Thomas's great work. The most important teachings of Thomas, the way our worldview, the way our psychic lens needs to change or be clarified, is to understand that this universe, in all of its manifestations and facets and functions, is a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects for human use or abuse. That this universe is composed of subjects to be communed with, not objects to be exploited, because everything has its own voice. One might say everyone is channeling the voice of Creator, of the divine energy. Thunder and lightning, stars and planets, flowers, birds, animals, trees, all of these have voices, and they constitute a community of existence that is profoundly related and which we serve as one gifted species within the whole. I love very much the words of a Berrien poet, Drew Dellinger, who describes the universe as the secret one growing a body. This is a whole new way of speaking about the incarnation of divinity, the divine one, taking on flesh, form, sarx. The universe then is the primary revelation of the divine. The universe is the primary revelatory scripture of divinity, and it's the primary locus or place of the divine and human community. So Thomas will say that as he tries to aid us in understanding who we are, where we are, how we got here, he is, of course, not a theologian. He calls himself a geologian. He's actually a cultural historian. And he describes our reality through the lens of history. History, he says, is governed by those overarching movements that give shape and meaning to life. By relating the human venture to the larger destinies of the universe. In this book, The Great Work, he goes on to describe what those have been throughout the eras of particularly human history, how humankind have been creating eras, earth ages that evoke all of our energies for a moment. Creating such a movement, he calls the great work of a people. So today we are examining or inquiring about what is the great work for us now. The great work for us now in this new millennium is to carry out a transition from a period of extraordinary human devastation of Earth to a period when humans will be present to the planet in a mutually beneficial manner. So this is an era of transition, transformation, requiring imagination, relying on information, leaning into collaboration and radical commitment if we are to save our planet in its integrity. It's going to take all the spiritual, every spiritual and environmental transformer on this planet. And that's what we're aiding one another today in becoming more whole, more confident, spiritual healers, spiritual warriors, ecological warriors of every stripe. And why do we say warrior? Because we are fighting the good fight, and it is a fight, as we'll see. Our brother Kevin is going to show us really what are the powers and principalities that we're up against in trying to heal this planet. It's going to take a world of ecozoic missionaries. And what is the ecozoic, once again, in case that word is new to us? It is the vision of hope that we are moving toward, an age of human creativity and not destructivity. I would like to introduce my brother and my wonderful ministry partner, Brother Kevin Patrick Cawley, known to all of you in the community of the Christian Brothers, and maybe hopefully known to you wider than that. I have known Kevin, as he said, for longer than we wish to talk about, but it is for about 45 years we've been engaged. I'm so grateful to have such a smart and committed brother beside me in this work, which is very hard, as we all know. He is a minister of environmental justice and justice advocacy. He has expanded the horizon of rights to include all beings, not simply human rights, but the rights of all beings and of the created world upon which humans depend for our very existence. He is the special United Nations reporter, offering audiences of all kinds, like ours, a seat at the table of deliberation and decision. He brings us into those domains so that we can understand from the most corporate level of our planet what's happening. Kevin Patrick is a liberating educator. He's an ecological journalist, and I hope most of you receive his monthly bulletin, The Carbon Rangers. And I have to salute him as a gentle and potent earth protector. Please welcome Brother Kevin Cawley.
Thanks, Kathleen, very much. Okay, if you have finished, can you just close your screen share? Thank you.
Yes.
Just a moment. Kathleen, your screen share is still on. You need to go to stop screen share.
Thank you. I'm really trying to do that.
Okay.
See if I can.
If you go to the top of the screen.
I'm sorry. Yes, there it is. Oh, forgive me.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Over to you, Kevin. You're on.
Okay, two things. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. And we
Thank
can
you.
see your screen also. Yes.
Okay, we'll see the screen. These are already imaginative triumphs. I want to thank Kathleen for her incredibly generous introduction and thank her for her wonderful setting of the stage here as we move into the next part of our morning here, or evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Particularly want to thank Kathleen for making sure we understand that, in the language that she used from Thomas, we are the living seeds of a new planetary time, and that's going to carry us forward. We need the spiritual transformation in order to keep the energy going. In a sense, the fuel for this work is spiritual all the time. We heard from Kathleen. We know her work. Here are the three challenges we're going to talk about briefly, each of them, and then we'll spend some time watching what's the world doing about this. First is climate change. We know that that's on everybody's mind, particularly at this time with so many of the storms and other indicators of the difficulties that the Earth is having responding to what's going on. It's linked to the biodiversity loss, which maybe is not on the front page of every newspaper, but it's certainly a significant feature of our time. And then the pollution crisis. A lot of it is centered on the issues of around the disposal of plastic, which we are talking about again soon. This is a photograph of Earth taken from one of our NASA flights from the US. We're now facing the right-hand corner. There is the brown surface of the moon, and we're watching Earth rise. The Latin is Sig vos non vobis, and it is from Dante, and it's, yes, it's for you, but it's not yours, to remind us about our stewardship requirements. And as we've been hearing, we're in some difficulty here on the planet. Thomas's context, he talks about it as a moment of supreme crisis, and he talks about the great work. We just heard about his vision. This is the vision, sadly, of what's happening in terms of the science of climate. This is IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now we're in UN speak, apologies. This graphic has been used for a number of years because it does lay out the parameters of the difficulty. There are three colors on the thermometer. In the green, is the goals, as they call them, from the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, which was to keep the warming of the planet atmosphere to 1.5 degrees centigrade or lower. That would be what we have to do to protect ourselves and protect life on Earth. The meeting in Paris ended with the direction to all the member states, the nations of the planet, go home to your capitals and write your national proposals. Tell us, how are you going to do this in your country and where you have control to keep everything to 1.5 degrees? And when they came back with their, as we say, report cards, we checked them at the UN, and we found out if every nation does everything they promised, we're still going to go to 3.3 degrees warming. That is not a good outcome. And the worst outcome, of course, is this business as usual, the yellow. If nobody does anything to improve our situation, we'll be at 4.2 degrees by the middle of this century, or 2100. Both of those numbers are actually catastrophic in terms of what they could do to the planet. So that's our problem. We've gotten the warning, and now we have to address it. Every additional ton of carbon dioxide, that's CO2, emitted now means more warming down the line. Limiting warming, as in the Paris Climate Agreement, to well below 2 degrees Celsius, degrees Fahrenheit. That's our challenge, because we can't keep putting the carbon in the atmosphere. Mostly, the concession is it's fossil fuels. The burning of coal, gas, and oil is sending up the CO2. We have to stop them by 2050. So not too long from now, maybe 25 years from now, we have to have it all under control. One of the outcomes of the warming we may not have noticed is that the oceans have been warming up. The daily global sea surface temperatures, this is in Fahrenheit, going back just 1 year ago. The little lines on the graph show you the fluctuations, and the mean, so to speak. The average temperature is in the middle, in the bright blue line, and other years from the 1970s are in the tiny faint blue squiggles. However, the one that we're worried about is the white line at the top. That's the ocean temperature globally just last year, and you can see it's a huge deviation from what's been going on. So last August was the last time we got a good hard look at this. And sadly, we got another look at it when we saw recent impacts in this hemisphere in the Gulf of Mexico with our two big storms. So this is the other day, the satellite photograph of Milton coming across Florida. You'll notice it's massive to the point of it's almost covering the entire Florida peninsula. And the Gulf is behind it. It heads into the Atlantic Ocean. As it headed out, it even generated 24 tornadoes. So far, the loss of life has been minimal, but you can't say that to the families that lost people. But it's not as catastrophic as we were worried about. But that's an image, and that's made more severe by the warmth of the ocean surface in the Gulf. So we've been told by the EU Climate Change Service that May of 2024, just passed, was the hottest May in recorded history. That was 12 straight months of the hottest months ever. These are all significant indicators of our problem. We have what we call the carbon budget. That is the amount of carbon, we've measured this, we know the answers, that is out there and what's the danger point. So we've been told that the remaining budget, that is what we have left to burn if we're going to behave ourselves, is around 200 billion tons of CO2. We know if we burn that, we will go past the 1.5 degrees. That's the reality of the physics. However, We are burning through the budget. We are using up about 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year recently. Well, if we're only allowed to 200 billion, and we're using up 40 billion tons a year, there's only a few years left in that budget before we have burned enough to increase the temperature past 1.5. That's the huge challenge. Heat is all around. If we go past 1.5, here's some of the things that might be going on. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees could be the difference between extinction and survival for some small island states and coastal communities. Some of us are even on this call from small island states and coastal communities. Other impacts of higher temperatures would be the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, with catastrophic sea level rise. The poles are different in their ice content. The North Pole, ice is already in the water. There's no land up there except Greenland. And that ice is sitting on land. So when it would come off the land and into the ocean, it would increase sea level rise. The same thing happening in West Antarctic ice sheet. When that comes off, that's land in the Antarctic at the South Pole. When the ice comes off the land, it will go in the water and raise sea level. It would also destroy coral reef systems and the livelihoods of 300 million people if this kind of heat continued. So in a sense, it's ironic. In one case, it's melting ice and sending it into the ocean. In the other case, it's warming up the ocean so much that it's killing the coral. We also know that this would impact the Labrador Sea Current, that would further disrupt weather patterns in Europe, and that the permafrost melt would be a catastrophic outcome as well. The heat warms the permafrost, which is actually frozen earth. And I guess the best example would be in Siberia, in the northern hemisphere, and add devastating levels of methane, which is a potent heat-trapping gas. It's more potent than carbon dioxide. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, but it does do more damage from, pardon me, from the heat of methane. There's also human rights implications because Human Rights International works at human rights issues. We're always aware that environmental failures and this climate crisis impact human rights in every country. Drought and pollution and water shortages, desertification, especially in the African continent. Severe storms, related events touched the lives of millions of people around the world last year, and they're still doing that kind of damage. Looking at Africa in particular, in February, there was a massive heat wave in Africa, and the climate people are saying that was probably 10 times more likely due to climate change. In Africa, there are a number of countries that have had terrible suffering. South Sudan in March, they ordered the schools closed. They had a temperature forecast of up to 45 degrees Celsius, which is 113 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very hard to even function in those temperatures. In other parts of Africa, South Africa, flags there showing those countries, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, South Africa, Zambia, temperatures were 4 to 5 C above the February average. So the African continent suffered terribly. India, sadly, suffers all the time from heat. This recently, northern India, parts of Delhi reached 49 degrees Celsius. That's 121 degrees Fahrenheit in May. Highest temperature in Delhi on record. And the sad part is it's complicated by the fact that it doesn't really cool down at night. The city cools down by only 8.5 degrees Celsius at night. If you're away from the cities, it cools down 12.2 degrees, which is a much better outcome. But if it's too warm to sleep, you're not getting your rest. You're not recovering from the long hours of exposure to the heat, and especially if you don't have air conditioning. So looking back, the past 5 decades, India has experienced more than 700 heat waves, claiming more than 17,000 lives. We presume that that's a conservative estimate, and it might be much worse, but it's still horrendous information. And it spares no one. We had 1,000 dead in Saudi Arabia during the pilgrimage at the height of the Hajj. There was a heat wave in Phoenix, Arizona this year, already claimed 72 lives, up 18% from last year's carnage. And we know that Phoenix has lots of air conditioning, but still people have been dying. And then in Mexico, there was a tremendous amount of heat and a lot of heat stroke deaths, and the temperature hit 52 C on the 13th of June, hottest June day ever recorded for Mexico. Not just one place that's having this. Now, we're at about 40 minutes in, and I thought maybe, Tino, we would take a little break here if people wanted to take some moments.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Kevin. Okay, and I'm just, okay, the chat is now open for everyone. Okay, so you're welcome to share any comments, clarifications, questions, either for Kathleen or Kevin, or any comments that you'd like to make. Maybe something like what has been a highlight for you, okay, what has startled you, what has been a learning for you, all right? And our Spanish speakers could even put in their comments in Spanish, and I'm sure Flavia will try and interpret them for us. Thank you.
No, should I stop screen sharing? Is that?
No, you can keep your screen on, you're fine.
Okay.
Kevin, so we have, Kevin, we'll give them about 2 minutes.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So you have 2 minutes. Thank you, George. Jesse, for your comment. Okay, it just shows also that the chat is open, so we await other comments too. Okay, just warning over there. Many of y'all are sending direct messages to me. Okay, please make sure that in the chat box it is to everyone. Thank you. So Patricia, Francis, Patrick, you'll all send direct messages to me. Please put your message again in the chat box and send it to everyone. Thank you. The same with Rosalie Mithupal and Patricia Rivera and Maria de Mello. Okay, Kevin, it's over 2 minutes now. I know there are still messages coming in, but we let them come in, but maybe you'd like to get on with your presentation.
Okay. So we're moving into another section of our work today. This is a set of stories, so to speak. They're brief, but they're part of our work, so we'll just move them along. The water story is a basic outline of where we sit in terms of this resource on this planet. 70% of Earth is underwater. If you look at it from space, it's always blue. You know, it's funny that we call it Earth. We could have called it water, but that's our story. So only 0.03% of the water on the planet is accessible and drinkable. So even though it's lots and lots of water, so much of it is ocean, only 0.03%, not even 1%, can we drink. We use 3 million gallons of this water to raise a cow or hamburgers. 3 million gallons per steer, if you're in the meat business. About 4,000 of that goes into one hamburger. So your Big Mac uses lots of water if you're still doing Big Macs. Also, fact of life, 2,900 gallons are needed to grow cotton for one pair of jeans. So many of us are wearing jeans, but we may want to keep that in mind. One of the things we've been encouraging people to do is don't throw away your clothing. Recycle it or repair it and reuse it. By 2030, we're estimating about half the planet would be facing water scarcity. There's a pollution story going on. This is a sculpture made to dramatize the impact of plastic on the planet. The sculpture is being brought around to the various meetings about the plastics treaty that the UN is trying to work out. It's a dramatic way to visualize the problem. One way to talk about it, every day the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes. So it ends up often in bodies of water. It's a global problem. Every year, 19 to 23 million tons leaks into aquatic ecosystems, pollutes everything. The next meeting of this treaty body is in Korea in a couple of weeks. Let's hope they can figure something out. There's also a disease story. We know that that's happening. The warming of the planet increases the spread of mosquito-borne disease. Why is that? Because mosquitoes can spread. The mosquito range is moving right now, moving north, way north of the equator from where it used to be. So more and more mosquitoes in better conditions. The warmth lets them proliferate. And we often worry about getting attacked by a shark, but not true. Mosquitoes and the diseases they carry kill more people in one day than sharks kill in 100 years. So we need to pay attention to the little guys. That's our difficulty. There's an extinction story going on. Mosquitoes are not becoming extinct, sadly. Other species at risk. For you in the Philippines, that's the Philippine eagle. He's our placeholder for species at risk. 3/4 of the 8.7 million species are at risk, according to a 2011 study about the biology of the planet. 3/4 are at risk. And even the most conservative estimates suggest that the current extinction rate, based on vertebrate data, is up to 100 times higher than it would be without human intervention. This circles back to Thomas Berry's concerns that We have to know better how to live and think about the other than human species as well. We're all connected. There's a justice story as well. There's some questions here on equality, inequality, and climate change. I'll take a few minutes. I'm going to try to make a little argument here, so I hope you can follow along. The sea level rise, SIDS is Small Island Developing States. SIDS, they call themselves at the UN. And some parts of the world, the climate change will likely become the sole driver of migration. There's a picture here of Tuvalu. Now, if you were living in Tuvalu and you were surrounded by ocean and someone said a storm is coming, you should go to high ground. In Tuvalu, the high ground is 6 feet. There's 12,000 people on that archipelago. They are tremendously exposed and at great risk. And that's one other indicator in terms of human rights, that they will not be able to live there much longer if the sea level keeps going up, which is an outcome of the burning of fossil fuels, as we know now from our original slides. We get drought, and then we get monsoons. It's a terrible whiplash effect. The upper picture is a picture of a Pakistan village inundated. This is 2022. About a third of Pakistan was underwater during their terrible storms in the monsoon time, after they had a drought. 33 million people displaced, and 90% of their agriculture was destroyed. And there you see a bunch of little kids being rescued. The lifeboat in that picture is actually a TV dish antenna. What this looks like in this photograph, taken in Pakistan at that time, a man in front of his house. And you can see on the wall of the house, you can see faint lines of where the water reached up. It was above his shoulders, at least in this photograph. And he's now standing in front of the house after the worst part of the floods have passed. One of the difficulties we have here is that 8 men own half the world's wealth. 8 men own the same wealth as the 3.6 billion people who make up the poorest half of humanity. This is one of our issues about inequality. Top 10% account for nearly 50% of global emissions. Sadly, the richest people in the world are burning the most carbon. In the 20th century, many countries were largely successful in expanding access to healthcare and education by taking these parts of the economy out of capitalist frameworks. Inequality could help explain the issue and help point to solutions. It's not just the richest countries, it's the richest people. And here's the challenge, as we may have mentioned earlier in the chat, I think somebody brought this up. There's simply no way that the middle class and the lower income groups are going to accept the kind of transformation that is needed if you don't ask for a much bigger effort from the people at the top. So we've got to draw the attention to the people at the top, to the inequality in income distribution, and then the magnitude of the catastrophes will also drive us to change attitudes. Can this happen? That's our question. Can you really change? Well, there's a picture of Stockholm, Sweden. Until 1920, Sweden was one of the most unequal countries in Europe. The system was only the top 20% of the richest men had the right to vote. Think about that. only the top 20% of the richest men had the right to vote. This is 1920. However, mobilization by the people, so to speak, ground up, trade unions, social democrats, etc., they drove the state capacity of Sweden to the service of a completely different political project. Here's how it happened. Instead of registering income and wealth to distribute voting rights in proportion to income and wealth, they registered income and wealth to make people pay higher taxes, to pay for health and education. The lesson is that the building of not-for-profit systems, either straight public or through nonprofits, education, and to a lesser extent, transport, housing, and energy, was an enormous success. So you can do it. It can happen. So for you to think about, maybe you want to put something in the chat later. What are these disruptions happening in your world? Where are they in your world? How do they impact the people you serve? You can see it all around you. And maybe you have been impacted personally. And where do you see change happening for the better? So those are reflection questions. Just tuck away for a while.
Kevin,
Now,
do you just want to give them 2 minutes to respond to that in the chat right now?
We can do that.
Yeah, if you just show the last slide again, lovely. So the chat is once again open. Okay, please make sure that when you're responding to any one or more of these questions that you send it to everyone. Okay, thank you. 2 minutes. Thanks, Flavia, for translating it for us Spanish speakers. Okay, I'll keep the chat open for a little while. And Kevin, maybe you'd like to carry on. Thank you.
All right, we're still working on signs of hope. We have a quote from Thomas to pull us back. And he's telling us here, again, I mentioned this earlier, the most difficult transition to make is from anthropocentric, that is the human as the center of everything, to biocentric, no more progress, where we're looking at the entire life system of the planet. If there is to be any true progress, then the entire life community must progress. Any progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself. Reminder of that context. Kathleen, did you want to add anything to that moment there?
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, I'm wondering I wonder if I should do my reflections or interventions now or when you hand it back to me. Whatever you think. You have more to say, do you?
I have more to say, but I think it might be good for a change of voice, even.
Well, then I'll say a few things then. Yes, thank you for that.
Would you like to share screen, Kathleen, or you're fine?
I think I'm fine for the moment if Kevin's going back to work. I don't want to distract from what he's doing. He's giving us the critical information we need to have clarity about this moment. And I want to make a distinction for us. We're talking about cultivating hope, but I want to say that hope is not optimism. And this is not an era for optimism. In one sense, optimism is an easy state of mind that allows us to think, perhaps uncritically, that everything will work out in the end. But we already know that things are not working out in the end. We already know that we have diminishments and impacts on the integrity of this planet that are not recoverable. Ice caps, ice sheets, this extraordinarily refined balance of the system that has taken, whether we're talking about Thomas's deep time vision of 14 billion years to generate a universe, of 4.5 billion years to see the emergence of a planet like ours, which is such a jewel in the universe, and 67 million years to get it calibrated just into this sweet spot of beauty and of fluorescence. We have at this stage interrupted quite seriously those refinements. So I think we need to have the kind of understanding that says we will not see the world for which we work, but we are the ones who will seed it. We won't see it. It's going to take generations and generations to rebalance the life systems if we can get the kind of renegade energies and renegade cohorts that are tilting the planet out of its balance. If we can bring those into a new commitment and alignment of Earth preservation, but we can seed it. And I'm sure that's what each and every single one of us is doing. We are working for it. So I think that it's really important to speak among ourselves in this wonderful cohort of people, Brother Tino, that you've invited and gathered here, to say, how can we support each other psychically, emotionally, intellectually, in terms of skills, in all of these ways, to carry on. We are going to have to carry on, even though we know that the ecozoic for which we work is way up ahead. and our generations may not see its fulfillment, but we will see the transition beginning because we're pushing it. It is a great educational task. It is an artistic task. We have to have our artists and our spiritual animators continuing to lift our spirits and continuing to show us the vision, as Thomas had a vision that he had as a little boy that carried him through his whole life, and it carried him with joy. That's a really important piece of it. We have to be cultivating a warrior spirit because we are looking at principalities and powers of ignorance and that are quite intractable. And we have to invoke whatever the energy of Michael, the archangel, the protector of the planet, for helping us deal with these human disorientations of greed and, as Kevin was saying, anthropocentrism. So, my question to myself and to all of us is, what is the vision that's empowering you forward? Even as, for example, in our part of the world, we're just holding our breath, knowing that if an election goes in a certain direction, we are going to be set back environmentally in an extraordinary manner. Can we keep going even when we feel that kind of undertow of hopelessness? How do we keep our hope alive?
Kathleen, you've just
Yes.
introduced the next slide.
Did I go for it?
Yeah, because you brought us to right up to Mary Robinson.
Oh, good. Good old Mary Robinson.
Okay, let's go and look at what she has to say. This was at the G20 Interfaith Forum. The G20, of course, is the 20 largest economies, and those leaders are meeting shortly. But there was a forum in Brasilia during the summer, and Mary Robinson, we know as the former president of Ireland, has been mentioned a number of times as potential Secretary General for the United Nations. And I know Kathleen has met her more than several times and shares her spirit. She talked about this in a keynote address during that forum, and she noted the critical role of interfaith cooperation in addressing these environmental challenges. I'll let you see her words. And she was very much like Kathleen was mentioning. Imagine the change we can create if we all join our voices, she said. We're on the cusp of a wonderful, safer, fairer, cleaner, healthier world. We're moving towards it, but not fast enough for science. Mm-hmm. Our leaders must accelerate the transition away from extracting industries and fulfill their promises to deliver on the global climate and nature goals. Again, looking forward, but being realistic. That's our twin challenge today. We need both good news and some realism about the struggles still to come. We need to hear about all the available solutions, and we need to make sure all of them are fact-based. We don't have time to waste. We go back to our signs of hope. Britain has just shut down its last coal plant. That's the nation that began the coal interval, so to speak, back in the 19th century. It's turned its back on coal forever. In this part of the world, little good story, Iowa farmers planting prairies with sustainability, trying to put back some wildflowers in the edges of their big fields. Africa looking up after the baobab trees began to die, and there was a tremendous fear these would disappear from the landscape, but they're now looking and seeing that they have begun to turn around, and they are surviving, and they will survive. We're new to this issue, but the mining challenge is going to be significant. You can see in the photograph the beautiful landscape, and then right at the bottom of the picture, the beginnings of an open pit mine. We need to secure a lot of rare minerals in order to get us away from the fossil fuels, but there are costs involved. We need to be responsible in this push to get those minerals out of the ground. The Secretary General in June gave an address on World Environment Day, a very powerful address, and he called on countries to do better. He cited some of the statistics that I just showed you earlier, and he also made this statement. He said, it's time to ban fossil fuel advertising. Ban fossil fuel advertising. He's making a big statement and a bold statement, and it's probably not one that's going to go over well in the precincts of the UN. He actually gave the speech at the American Museum of Natural History. He wasn't really on his home turf, but he got very forceful there. There was a summit of the future not too long ago at the UN trying to push forward the agenda. Guterres called it. He asked us to go to work on it to shape our common future. One of the outcomes there, to reinvigorate the Agenda 2030. That's going back to the Sustainable Development Goals, which were developed in 2015. You may recall Pope Francis came to the US and spoke at the UN on the day they passed the General Assembly resolution to endorse Agenda 2030. They were grateful to Francis for his intervention. The logo there, the Treaty for Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation, that's a group that's been working for a while to stop all this fossil fuel business. However, at the Summit of the Future, we had a problem with language, which is always going to happen at the UN. They issued a document at the end to transition away from fossil fuels, but the language that as we say, the civil society wanted was, it's time to phase out fossil fuels. The difficulty is the fossil fuel industry likes the word transition away because it gives them more time to drill for oil and sell the oil and continue the problem. So it's time to phase it out, but that didn't get into the document. We're going to work on that. That's one of our challenges. They adopted a Pact of the Future. They adopted a Global Digital Compact, and they adopted a Declaration for Future Generations. So they were looking at a lot of directions there. And I think that's probably the first time we've seen the expression AI, artificial intelligence. It's going to be a feature of the landscape for all of us for the next interval. It was populated by wonderful grassroots activists. It wasn't just prime ministers and ambassadors. Here's a picture of Hilda Flavia Nakabuye, who is an Ugandan climate and environmental rights activist, speaking at one of the events at the Summit of the Future. It was Climate Week. Every year at the General Assembly in New York, they have a Climate Week event where they bring a lot of energy and ideas together. This is from a woman named Helen Clarkson. Used to be I think the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Now she's got her own climate group. And her cry was to put people first. Now, of course, this is bumping into Thomas Berry's idea that you can't just put the people first all the time, but you have to understand Helen's context. Transition has to be just. It's time to pay up. The global north, here we go again with inequality, has a historical responsibility to free up long overdue climate finance so that people living in the bad places are protected. And it's time to have the difficult discussions about fossil fuels. How do we get fossil fuel companies to shift their business? Huge challenges. That's Helen, another kind of Mary Robinson character, a very strong, bold woman with great vision. Some good stuff. Here you go. Countries have been losing 9 million acres of tropical forest every year. They're crucial. We know that. Now, the Tropical Forest Future Fund, sorry, initials again, would require no donations. What we're asking for is an investment. This is from Batmani, a man in Brazil, Forest Service. They would basically get rich nations and philanthropies. They would give the fund $25 billion to start, and they would repay it with interest. And the fund would pay countries that achieve thresholds for limiting deforestation. So if you're a country like Ecuador and you've been saving your forests, that's wonderful, but nobody's giving you credit for it. Now they're saying, we'll pay you to save your forest. Let's hope it works. Another piece of this conversation, we talked about biodiversity loss. There's a big conference of the parties, COP, coming up at the end of this month in Cawley, Colombia, about how to save this issue in terms of biodiversity. We mentioned already there's a big conference in Busan, Korea about the plastics treaty. We're hoping that that gets some good news. The next COP, Conference of the Parties 29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, is coming up in November. That's about climate. And the conference will be in Azerbaijan. Sadly, yes, it's another petro state, an oil state. They found oil in Baku in 1905, and they've been pumping it ever since. So we have to figure out how to get this conference to actually do something, even though it's an oil country where it's hosted. Big moment for loss and damage. This is the one that came out of Paris. There's got to be money for these countries that have suffered. How do we do that? Here's an answer. One of my friends, this is Mia Motley. She's speaking in this picture in Glasgow at COP28. She's Prime Minister for Barbados, COP26, sorry. A good name to know. She's speaking in that podium at that lectern. She's looking down at presidents and prime ministers and telling them, you have the money. We know there's money, because that's one of the big cries. Oh, there's not enough money for this. She's saying you can do it. Here's her proposal. Put a 1% tax on fossil fuel transactions and put the money in the loss and damage fund for poor nations. 1% tax. How much would that generate? And the answer is, hiding under this little logo here, $70 billion a year you can generate from the 1% tax. So don't tell me and Motley there's no money. We have to talk about mitigation. That's meaning fixing what's broken. Stop putting the greenhouse gases in the air, and adaptation, fix the things that are broken and move on. And then basically the third option here is suffering. We know that's all going to happen. We're going to have to do mitigation. We're going to have to do adaptation, and we're probably going to be doing a lot of suffering. Another small island developing state. This is in Palau, the island of Puluana. You can imagine that they might be vulnerable to rising sea levels. Another example. Pakistan has a good news story. They're putting up Chinese solar panels and putting them up themselves. They're not waiting for their government. You saw their situation with the floods 2 years ago. It's the third largest importer now of solar modules. They're putting up solar panels on their own because they know they have to do something. We're trying to electrify Africa to get 300 million Africans with electricity by 2030. They're getting a pledge from the World Bank. These are good things. We know that if we do conservation, it slows biodiversity loss. Studies show that if you do a lot of conservation efforts to reduce biodiversity loss, it works. 2 out of 3 of those projects made a positive impact. You can make a difference. We've just got a good example here in this part of the world. First time in 100 years, we got salmon in the Klamath River out on the US West Coast. They took down a bunch of large dams, and the salmon came back within a couple of months. Right near where I live, an offshore wind project has just been approved off the coast of New Jersey in this part of the world. Will deliver a huge amount of gigawatts. It's one of the largest clean energy projects in America. Just got approved this week. We know that the Pope has spoken about this. I bring it up periodically. It's a wonderful document. If you haven't read Laudato Si, please find a copy. It's on the Vatican website, and you can get it for free, basically. And in that document, he told us all the things we just looked at, that the poor suffer first from all these issues. Francis always bringing the poor back in front of us. And then he had another document, Laudate Deum, just before the COP last year, saying we didn't do enough. There's his big quote. So Pope Francis is telling us, I realize that our responses have not been adequate. It's a great cry from him to say, let's do better. And Thomas, at the end here, you can see again the continuity between the human and the other than human. It's one integral community. And once we get that right, we will have fulfilled the basic condition that will enable the human to become more present to the earth. And there's the expression, a mutually enhancing manner. Thomas Berry. Kathleen, you may have a final word. You're
You
muted,
have to
Kathleen.
unmute yourself, Kathleen, please.
Thank you, Kevin. I actually have more than a final word. I'd like to share just a few other things if I may.
Yes, please go ahead, Kathleen. If you want to share your screen, please do so.
Yes, thanks. I would. Am I unmuted?
You're okay. We're hearing you. We're seeing you.
Good, thank you.
The slideshow from the first slide.
So I'd like to just share a few more of the, how shall I say, exhortations of Thomas Berry that might aid us as we bring this conversation to a conclusion. Let me just get to the part of my conversation that works for now. But, you know, I'm very aware that we are a cohort of very, very powerful people on this call. We're educators. We belong to that faith-based community that Kevin was describing, which is rising like a wave, because of course the moral communities are most alert to this crisis and in a sense have the most suasion over their communities to act. Of course, we know this with Pope Francis, and we are the people of the Laudato Si generation and movement. But let me just share a few other things that Thomas offers us to sustain our hope. I guess you can tell that Brother Kevin and I, even though we are partners in this great work, we have very different orientations. Kevin is living in the very, very real world of human engagement with the crisis. I'm living somewhere out of a resource of a ground or a fund of sacred wisdom. That's what my training has set me up for. I come to this from Thomas's understanding that there is a real renewal of human consciousness that has to happen, because the state of mind, the state of awareness that we have had in this, what he calls this petrochemical age, or this climate crisis interval, has been generated by really retrograde energies in human nature, very, very concerned with the human exclusively, with human progress, as a way of understanding in the world, as a commitment to some systems like capitalism, industrial development, and now even AI, which we are on the verge of something either wonderful or catastrophic, and probably both. It will always have to be discerned how we use our human genius going forward. Thomas wants to say that the primary work of this moment is the reinvention of the human itself as a species within the commune of creation. That re-enchantment with Earth as a living reality is the condition for our rescue of Earth from the impending destruction that we are imposing on it. And to carry this out effectively, we must now, in a sense, he says, reinvent the human species. Oh, our sense of reality, what's really real? As Kevin was trying to help us understand in the water story, in the atmosphere story, in the energy story, all of these realities must be evaluated. We have to have a new sense of value. What's really of value? The gross global product accelerating and expanding all the time? Or do we go to zero growth? We go to try to live within the parameters of what the earth can offer us. But for that, we have to really abandon this anthropocentric norm of reference. We have to become biocentrists. And so I want to just offer a few of Thomas's exhortations that I think will keep our energy for keeping on alive. Thomas, even though he did not want to ever call himself a theologian, was very committed to what he called the numinous experience of existence, the sacred, mysterious experience of existence, wherein we are given to each other in a larger celebration of existence, in which everything attains its highest expression in this one single celebratory event. He wanted to activate a state of mind in which we lived in constant awareness that we are participants in a cosmic liturgy of divine life. And so he says, is it possible that my next thought, word, and deed could actually be a celebration of Earth, of cosmos, of the mystery of life? What if each of us came at our daily work, our daily lives in that spirit? It would give us energy to take on the challenges that we must. As we said, as Kevin was saying, the spirituality of our time, the spirituality for these ecozoic missionaries that each of us must be in our locale, doing the one thing that this work calls each of us to do. And our situation gives us our work orders, so to speak. And nothing is too small to take up in the work of protecting life, protecting Earth. Because let's remember, I remember this all the time, and I say it to you, my friends, think of the size of a seed. Think of the size of any seed as it's given into the matrix of the earth to die in order to allow its generativity to take hold. Very small. Small is beautiful. This universe began out of the mysterious we know not that was about the size of a sesame seed. And 14 billion years later, it's still going and going. We must have faith in what is small. We have to have faith in what is smart. We have to be those sober, smart, spiritual warriors who are more fierce than pious, who really have some sort of savvy about how to face off with greed and self-serving of the human. And I mean this, starting with myself every day. For me, it's a daily task to be attentive to all of that. And to cultivate the field of lilies in my imagination that were in Thomas's, opening up the possibilities. So can we be celebrants each day? This work must unfold in joy, not in despair or depression. That is not to say that despair and depression will not visit us in the work, because it will. But do we have strategies and creative practices to restore us to what is celebratory? The next question Thomas wants to ask, that we invite with every thought and word and deed, is my next thought, word, or deed sustainable for me and for the commune of creation? Is it earth-centered? Is it self-limiting for the sake of healing the earth? I think this is where we come to what Kevin was talking about, our spirituality, that is to say, what energizes our hope and our great work. Is it capable of sacrifice and suffering? These are two, how shall I say, possibilities, potentials of us for the work that we are needing to be doing. Is my next thought, word, or deed, Thomas asks, is it organic? That is to say, even as I draw from the living earth to live, do I return to the living earth what she needs to live? When we speak of a life being organic, we're talking about a life in a creative wheel that draws from the source and then returns to the source, where there's no externalizing the cost, externalizing the waste. But are we imagining ways to make my life more organic and beautiful? Here's one I love so much. Will my next thought, word, and deed promote greater intimacy with Earth, my mother, my teacher, my sustainer? Thomas also says, let me say by way of parenthesis, that 4 wisdoms will guide us in the great work. 4 wisdoms will sustain our hope. The wisdom of indigenous peoples around this planet, because it is they who live in the greatest intimacy with the earth and her energies and her systems and her communities. Indigenous peoples who have not been trained and formed within an industrial worldview an extractive worldview, an indigenous worldview that understands that what is taken must be returned in some creative, constructive way. So it is indigenous peoples and indeed in indigenous spiritualities that guide us into intimacy with Earth. And I love this, these images of intimacy in their most ordinary, habitual, everyday ways. How do we love the living commune of creation? How do we translate our care of earth and other kind into works as we see them here? We see the Australian firefighter trying to save a koala. We see the saviors of small rhinos in the African continent, bringing these endangered animals to a refuge and giving them human care and intimacy because they are our kin. How shall each of us do this in our own way? The final one, which I think is perhaps the most important, that Thomas doesn't really invite us to, but we invite ourselves to. We prolong the wisdom, we expand the wisdom of Thomas and say, how is my next thought, word, or deed an act of solidarity with people made poor, creatures made homeless, the marginalized, the trafficked, the enslaved, who subsidize so much of my living, our living. No matter where we are in this world, there is always someone who are leaned upon more extremely to subsidize human living than my own. How am I mindful of them in my daily life? I'll end with Thomas's manifesto, and then maybe we have some time to talk together. What he's saying is we are no longer looking for a pax romana, an imperial peace imposed on the world by some great powers, nor are we simply looking for the pax humana. It's not simply peace among humans that we are laboring for. We are laboring for pax Gaia, the peace of earth and the peace of every being who comprise this living matrix of life, our mother, our sister earth. So let us be grateful for this wonderful teacher who, as a little boy, was enraptured by lilies of the field, and he never forgot it. And these lilies guided his life and teaching until his last day at 93 years old. So thank you all so much for letting me share him with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathleen. And thank you very much, Kevin. Kathleen has just put up some contemplative questions to provoke us. So let's just sit with them for a little while. there's so much of wisdom that has been offered to us in today's enrichment session, and it has really been enriching. And I want to let everyone know that the video link of this will be shared with you so that you can go over it whenever you'd like to, take small parts of it, reflect on it, share it with others, okay? You'll have the time to do that. So with that, I will now turn to Terry. Terry, for your thoughts. Terry is also a team member on the ERI team and part of our team here in Geneva. And he is present in the room over there with two of the African brothers that I was telling you about who have joined us for this week. And next week, the two of them, including myself, are going to Taizé. And we're looking forward to that experience. Over to you, Terry.
Tino, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
First of all, to say thank you to Flavia for doing the translation and the interpretation. She's always so kind and so good at doing that. Thank you, Kevin, for your inspiring, bringing us to reality of what is really happening at this time in our Earth, in our world, in our cosmos, for Mother Earth, and the various challenging stories that the way you put it that way, and the signs of hope that are taking place in a very pragmatic and practical way amongst people and amongst nations. And Sister Kathleen, how can I put it in words to try and say the wisdom that you've unfolded for us of Thomas Berry? You did it in such a reflective way and with such inspiring words, with such depth. I would need to take each one of your little pictures and spend an hour reflecting on them, because there was such depth in what you have said to us. What I bring away from what the wisdom that you unfolded for us was how we should understand incarnation. And then I think we brought it to such a small idea of incarnation, whereas it's a cosmological event that is keeping on going. And God is revealing God's self that way. And then what my next thought, word and deed, intimacy with my Mother Earth. That is so beautiful. And the idea of celebration. And I think that is a new understanding for me of Eucharist. And I want to thank you for that. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Sister Kathleen. And thank you, Flavia, and all the participants. Thank you, Tino.
Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you. And with that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for remaining with us. And thank you, Kathleen. It's so lovely to see you again. I still remember the lovely meeting that we had along with Kevin. And thank you for agreeing to do this very special enrichment Zoom along with Kevin. Kevin always does enrichment Zooms. He's always willing to do enrichment Zooms, training Zooms, even come to Geneva to do care of the earth with us. Okay, but you brought, as Terry said, a very special perspective into today's Zoom. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to all our participants. At this time, you're most welcome to say your thanks or your byes to one another. Okay. Yes, Kathleen, before that, Kathleen would just like to say a word.
I want to thank you, Tino. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who came into this circle. I can't tell you how it activates my hope to see all your beautiful faces in this iconostasis of caretakers of Earth, the lovers of Earth. I want to, on behalf of Kevin and myself, I want to invite you to join us when we have our programming. Maybe we can coordinate with Tino so that we can open some of our projects and programs of enrichment to you as a further way to collaborate together.
And that would be wonderful, Kathleen. If you could just send me the links, okay, when I'm sending out the link to this YouTube recording of this presentation, I'll send out those also, so those who would like to join can also join.
Thank you.
All right.